I always thought my last day at the company would be like the finale of a good TV series. Tears, hugs, a toast to new horizons, maybe even a photo collage on the big screen with Coldplay playing in the background. But instead, there was arugula salad, iced tea, and a new CEO eating a turkey sandwich with a look on her face like she was deciding the fate of the world, not mine. We were sitting in the Willow Garden restaurant, a place that used to be a symbol of victory. This is where we celebrated every important deal, every breakthrough, every anniversary. Today, it smelled of pickled cucumbers and insincerity. The tables were the same. The tablecloths were white. But the atmosphere was sterile, like in a hospital where the patient hasn't been told the diagnosis yet, but everyone already knows Savannah Mears, 34, a Stanford graduate, is the new face of the company. Sharp cheekbones, a signature cream-colored tiramisu suit, an Apple Watch on her wrist, phrases memorized like a brochure. She didn't even take off her coat. She sat up straight, as if she were about to give a press conference, not fire me under lemon sauce. "Brendo," she began almost tenderly. "I've been thinking long and hard about how to say this. You have tremendous experience without exaggeration. You're a legend at this company, but always smells like the end," I thought. But we're in a phase of change right now. We need more momentum, new energy, thinking outside the box. I nodded. I didn't say a word. I felt my jaw clench on its own. My whole body went silent. Even the fork I was holding froze over the salad, like an antenna picking up signals. "This isn't about you," she added. "It's about the direction we're going in, and we want you to finish this phase with dignity. We are offering 3 months of financial support and recommendations. Everything will be handled professionally." Professional, another word that often masks betrayal. I used to use it myself when I needed to transfer someone from a project. But for the first time, I understood how it sounded from the other side. Like a stamp on a certificate. Suitable, but useless. I wasn't surprised by the dismissal itself. I felt a storm coming. I hadn't been invited to strategic meetings for several weeks. Approvals were sent through assistants, and suddenly the emails I was copied on disappeared. It was like a gradual fading. First the color, then the outline, and then silence. But still, when it happens, face to face, with a smile and a salad in front of your eyes, something inside you breaks not loudly. Quietly, almost gently, like someone unplugging the computer you've been working on for 20 years, without warning, without a save button. "It's on the company, of course," she said, handing me the bill. "But we need your signature here." She pointed to the printout with a ballpoint pen. "Official consent to terminate employment by mutual agreement." I didn't answer. I just took the pen, put on my glasses, read every word. Not because I had any doubts, but to make her wait, even if only for half a minute, so she would understand that I wasn't just a shadow in the reports, I was a person. When I signed, she smiled and said, "You're a real professional, Brendo." I took off my glasses and I said quietly, "I am the memory of this company, and memory has a strange habit of returning at the most unexpected moments." We stood up at the same time. She offered her hand. I held out mine. Cold as this tea. And when our palms met, I knew she had won this round. But not the game. I left the restaurant under the soft sun. Leaves were falling from the trees, as if gently hinting, "It's time." But inside, something remained, strong, immovable. The salad remained, the silence remained, and I remained not old, not broken, just ready. I returned home earlier than usual. It is remarkable how habit still turns on the coffee grinder at 6:15 p.m., even if the world is no longer the same as it was in the morning, even if you are no longer in the system. The coffee was bitter. Probably the filter was clogged with resentment. I sat down in the kitchen, put my phone face down on the table, and for the first time that day, I just sat there. No one called. No one asked where the report was. No one reminded me that tomorrow was Monday, and that was what scared me the most. My life was reduced to items on a calendar, a conference call with Martin, editing Joan's presentation, discussing metrics in the strategy unit. Every day was like an Excel spreadsheet, filled to the last cell. And then suddenly, nothing. A blank screen, and the cursor blinking, and not going away. I got up, walked around the apartment, opened the closet. Everything was hanging in its place: blouses, jackets, sneakers for pitches, which I only wore to meetings with tech startups to look like I belonged among the young crowd. I wouldn't need them anymore, probably. At the bottom of the drawer was a badge for my first conference. 2004. New York. Back then, I was still the kind of person who wore clothes one size too big, just in case, and tried not to forget to thank everyone who gave me even one chance. I remember how scared I was to pick up the microphone, and then I did, and I never let go. 20 years. 20 years of morning meetings, late-night edits, projects we launched from scratch. I was at the forefront of every key initiative in the company. I negotiated when everyone else was afraid to say a word. I smoothed over conflicts, balanced on a knife's edge, and built from the ruins. But none of that was in the final letter. Just, thank you for your contribution. I opened my laptop. I logged into my corporate email. They hadn't had time to turn off my access yet. Mail, plus 37 unread. An announcement about a new approach to brand strategy. Congratulations to the new strategy and digital innovation team. When I saw the name Maeve, my former intern, in the title Head of Brand Future, I didn't feel hurt, not even angry. I felt absence, emptiness, as if I wasn't even there. Maeve is a nice girl, but she doesn't know half of what I had to work through at night when she hadn't even applied for her master's degree. And now she's going to rewrite the system I created. Rewrite it without knowing why it works in the first place. I closed the email. I went to Google Drive. Folder. Old drafts. I'd been building this database for 10 years. All versions of presentations, case studies, non-standard scenarios, things that would never see the light of day in official reports. And among them was one file that I had once named If They Push Me to the Edge. Written at 3 a.m. after the failure of a big deal, when the CFO was trying to make me the scapegoat. It contained data, facts, chronology, screenshots, all the schedules for key decisions, who was pushing, who was leaking, who was covering for others. I never pressed send, but I saved it, because something told me I would need it, and here I am, in the same kitchen, with the same Excel files, but for the first time, not for them, for myself. And you know what? For the first time in many years, I'm not afraid. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe I'll be forgotten. Maybe I'll disappear from the company's history like a photo from Google Drive. But there are things that no one can erase: memories, experience, and the fact that I have the whole truth. And with the truth, you can always start a new story. At 10:03 the next morning, a letter arrived. Human Resources. Subject: Meeting to complete the administrative process. I wasn't surprised. They always played the academic card, even when they were cutting people off at the knees. I opened the document, 3 pages. No emotions. No, thank you for your years of service. Just a set of legal constructs that boiled down to one sentence. Your vision and energy no longer resonate with the transformational mission of the renewed brand. Don't panic. But it was accurate. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a sentence. In other words, thanks for keeping the walls warm, but now the temperature has changed, and you won't survive in it. I closed my laptop. I went out onto the balcony. The city was going about its business. Buses were stuck in traffic, as usual. Someone was arguing over the bill at the cafe across the street. Only I was silent. For the first time in 20 years, I read about myself in the past tense. I went back to my laptop. I reread the letter. And again. Energy doesn't match. What kind of criterion is that? How is it measured? In lumens, kilojoules, likes on Slack? And then there was brand values. I was the one who created those values. We came up with them at night on trips to the Rhine, wrote down the positioning when there was no marketing budget yet. And now, someone who joined 3 months ago decided that I no longer fit in with what I myself had once invented. At that moment, I wanted to call Michael. He was still on the team, one of the few who remembered those early years. But I didn't press call. Too risky, and too early. Because now every word is a potential weapon. And for now, it's better to stay silent. Instead, I opened the archive. I returned to that file. If they push us to the edge. And I started rereading it. I didn't leak anything, but I knew everything. I knew who was leaking. I knew who was benefiting behind the scenes. I knew how they covered up failures, who was paid for independent audits, how environmental requirements were reduced in exchange for contracts. And I kept it not because I wanted to blackmail anyone, but because I was someone who never played dirty, but always remembered who did. And now, I'm going to need it. I created a new folder. Archive B. No romance, no revenge, just documentation. What, when, who. No comments, no interpretations, just data. There used to be a poster on the office wall with a quote, "Data is not revenge, it is protection." I remember one of the younger employees asking, "Why not write about trust?" And I replied, "Because trust is ephemeral, data is not." And then they laughed. Now, it's not funny. At 1 p.m., I had a call scheduled with HR. I joined on time. A new HR representative appeared in the window. Emilia. She was in her 20s. She used the same phrases they teach in training. "We really appreciate your contribution. We're sorry this is difficult for you to hear. We believe that this new phase will bring you new opportunities." Not a word about how they had destroyed 2 decades with a single stroke. I listened silently. For the first time, my silence was like a weapon, and something in that silence began to scare them. "Brendo, are you with us?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I'm just thinking. I need some time to review the document from a legal perspective. I'll get back to you as soon as possible." "Of course. You have until Friday." Until Friday. How nice. When the call ended, I sat in front of the monitor for a few more minutes. Then I opened the Archive B folder and started over. This time, not out of emotion, but out of calculation. On Thursday at 8:47 a.m., I received a message from Ronnie. "Are you okay?" Short and to the point. No emojis, no context. And that alarmed me even more than if she had written something emotional. Ronnie never wrote, "just because." She was one of those people who lived by the rules of the NDA and wore loyalty like a badge. 15 minutes later, another message arrived. "Your last name is gone from the org chart, completely, even in the legacy docs." I didn't reply. I just opened our internal portal. I no longer had access, of course, but I had saved a lot. People's habits, their mannerisms, and, as it turned out, their passwords too. One of them was an old access to a communication archive that no one had used since 2019. And then I saw it. An announcement. Changes in leadership structure. A photo of the new CEO in the center. Caption. "We are grateful to Brandy Sellers for her many years of contribution to the brand. We are moving forward with new ideas, new faces, and a new vision." I wasn't laid off. I was erased. My former position was on the list of speakers for the next quarterly presentation. Now it was taken by Connor, my subordinate, the same one who forgot to include KPIs in reports and then cried that he was being scolded for it. At lunchtime, I received a message from Michael. "I can't write much, but I don't agree with this. I wasn't consulted." I looked at the message and exhaled. So, something had started. I hadn't done anything yet, but they were already nervous. And that was my first victory. I didn't send any letters or posts on LinkedIn. There was no statement. There were no explanations, only silence. But it turned out to be louder than posts with emojis. Claire called that evening. We hadn't spoken in years. After her project was shut down, she just disappeared from the radar. But now her voice was clear. "I knew something was wrong. They changed the briefing schedule. They said the vision had changed, and the vision is yours." "Why are you calling me?" I asked calmly. "Because I think you're up to something, and I'm one of those who remembers how you prepared for the tender in 2012. We were written off then too, and you pulled us to first place." I smiled. She couldn't see it, but she must have felt it. "Not yet, Claire," I said, "but I've started breathing more deeply." It was true. A new folder appeared in my Google Drive. Step 1. It contained screenshots, old presentations, performance reviews, everything that should prove who made key decisions and when. Because they are now creating a new narrative, one where I am not the leader, but a supporting player. And I wasn't going to let that happen. After the call, I remembered a meeting. An old one, 2015. 7 in the morning, a conference room with no heating. I was sitting with Henry, the owner at the time, and I was trying to convince him not to sell some of the assets. My arguments were as bare as the windows in that room. But then he said, "Your intuition is sometimes more accurate than all my Excel spreadsheets. It's scary, but I trust you." And now, the trust is gone. But the intuition remains, and it tells me that they are afraid of silence, because silence is a sign that they have lost control, and that someone else is gaining it. The first step is always the hardest, but in my case, it was almost trivial. I opened an old contact in my email, the private address of Elliot Harler, an experienced lawyer you won't find on LinkedIn, the one we hired back in the day to sort things out with investors, and the one who had seen more deals in draft form than their final editors. I wrote one sentence. "Elliot, imagine a case where a woman is excluded from the system after 19 years, and her authorship of a communication strategy is now attributed to someone else. Is it worth talking about intellectual property rights?" He replied in 9 minutes. "Let's meet. I'll bring coffee and silence. It will be more useful than outrage." And I knew, that's it, I'm not alone anymore. The next morning, I checked my email. Nothing in my corporate account, as expected. But I had a personal email with the subject line, "Retraction Notice, Q1 Strategy Outline." I opened it. It said that due to internal updates, the files from March 20th are no longer relevant. The same files where I was the author of the presentation for shareholders. They had been deleted, or, more accurately, rewritten. It was no coincidence. It was a clue. And I clicked Save as PDF. For my meeting with Elliot, I wore the suit I wore for my presentation to the board in 2020, when we came out of the negative forecast after the crisis. It was my way of reminding myself that I wasn't just the ex. We sat in a cafe where the room was filled with wood and lattes. He took out his notebook. No iPad, no gadgets. "Do you want to win or look good?" he asked right away. "I don't want them to dictate the story," I replied. He nodded. "Then you need facts, timelines, and—" "Witnesses," I finished. "And silence. They can't know where you're going, not until it's too late." That evening, I opened Google Sheets. Title: Legacy Map. I created a table with 3 columns: date, event, document link. I started with 2013, the first presentation in which I proposed a format of client stories instead of dry characteristics. Then, year after year, all the projects where I was not just a participant, but an initiator. There were 28 of them. In 9 of them, my role has already been redefined. In 4, my name has been replaced with team development. I felt a sense of calmness in my chest. Not anger, not despair, just cold, structured clarity. 2 days later, I sent an anonymous request through the GLA platform. It's a platform for reporting corporate misconduct. I had previously helped implement it. Now I was using it. The message was simple. Recent changes in reporting may indicate retrospective falsification of authorship. References to the person who initiated strategic changes over the past 10 years have disappeared from the company structure. Archive files are being deleted. Intellectual property rights violations are evident. Signed, Ex-Eagle. And one last thing. I visited the website of a consulting agency called Glass and Slate Partners. They had a strong reputation among those who wanted to give back a voice to women leaders in the corporate world. I wrote to them, "My name is Brenda, and I have a story that is not yet over, but it began when I was erased from my own text. I have documents, facts, and peace of mind. Are you interested?" I clicked send, and for the first time in many days, I simply closed my eyes, not from fatigue, from an inner silence that was no longer emptiness. It all started with a push notification. The CEO of West Martech will be speaking at the Digital Horizon 2025 conference. I would have ignored it if it weren't for one name under the presentation title. From Legacy to Loyalty, How BK Strategies Built the Foundation of Trust. BK, my initials, Brenda Crosby. There were no details on the website, no photo, no description. But for me, It was like a shot in the air at the opening of a parade. It was no coincidence. It was no compliment. Someone was sending me a signal. That same evening, I wrote to Elliot. Can you check who applied for this panel? I have a suspicion that there's someone there, not quite from that side. He didn't ask why. 2 hours later, he sent me a PDF. The panel organizer was Amara Bloom. She was the former PR director at Spireline, a company I consulted for back in 2018. At the time, she was still an intern. She listened, took notes, asked questions, and I always answered. Now she is head of brand impact. And for the first time in weeks, I felt that someone remembered me. On the third day, I got a call. An unknown number, a New York number. The voice was confident and neutral. Miss Crosby? This is Miss Bloom's office. She asked me to pass on an invitation to an event. You are not a speaker, but your presence would be appropriate. I smiled. Could you clarify? Appropriate for whom? For history and for balance, they replied, and hung up. The conference was held at the Orion Hotel. I put on a graphite jacket with thin silver thread, the one I once considered too much for internal meetings, and I sat down in the third row, almost unnoticed, but so that I could see everything. Amar came on stage, confident, strong. On the slide was the logo of the company where I had worked for 19 years, and below it was the headline. When we talk about trust, we don't always know who to thank, but some people have known this for a long time. The next slide was a map of customer segments, mine. I knew every color, every mark. And then she said, this model was created in 2017, when the new management had no understanding of the target behavior of Generation Z. It was created by the then head of strategic communications, Brenda Crosby. The room was silent, but not dead silent, expectant. She's not on stage today, but she's here. And I just want to say, we remember, we know. When the presentation ended, I was the first to leave the room. I didn't want applause. I didn't want questions. But in the lobby, 2 people approached me, a young woman and a gray-haired man wearing a badge that read Legal and Ethics Council. Are you really Brenda? The woman asked. I nodded. Could we send you a formal request for the materials you mentioned in your complaint? A formal request. This wasn't anonymity. It was a step forward. Yes, I replied, but not today. Today, I'm just listening. Later, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and changed the name of my spreadsheet from Legacy Map to Voice Reinstated. And I clicked Share with 3 contacts, Elliot, Glass and Slate, and Amara. I added a note to each. History should not be edited. It should be told correctly. The first email arrived at 8:12 a.m. No greeting. No signature. Just the subject line. Documents. Check the date. Attached was a scan of a presentation titled New Foundations, Brand Reset 2025. It was official, with the company logo and a section titled Phase 0 Legacy Systems Cleanup. At the bottom, in small print, it said, based on previous developments without source attribution. I wasn't listed among the authors, but I knew those words. I wrote them. And 3 years ago, I had the original in my own archive. That same day, I got a call from Greta, a former analyst from my department who was quietly fired last year. Brendo, hi. Have you seen Phase 0? That's yours, right? We built this framework together. I was silent. She added, if you go ahead with this, I'm with you. I have all the discussions saved. Slack, comments in Notion, the same timestamps. On the 3rd day, I received a message from Glass and Slate. It was concise. We're ready. There will be several figures in the case who currently hold high positions. The risk is high, but so is the protection. It's up to you. I closed my laptop, and for the first time in a long time, I stepped out onto the balcony without a plan. A gray fog hung over the city, the sounds of cars, the smell of moisture and coffee from the street, and absolute certainty. It wasn't me disturbing the peace. It was the truth. On the same day, an official response appeared. The company published a press release. Recent statements made in independent public statements are the private opinions of individuals who have no current employment relationship with the company. We believe in teamwork and modern approaches to innovation based on collective contribution, not personal ambition. I printed out the text. I highlighted no current relationship and personal ambitions. Then I called the editorial office of Branded Equity Weekly. This isn't an interview yet, but I can send you the document, just one. And if you find enough reasons to dig deeper, we'll talk. In the evening, I wrote to Amara again. I won't ask you to speak again, but thank you for taking the first step. It was bigger than you think. The reply came 2 minutes later. They thought they could rewrite everything, but they didn't take into account that we learned from you too. On the 5th day, the silence disappeared. It was replaced by a crack. The HR department sent out a general letter urging employees to refrain from unauthorized comments in the public sphere that could be interpreted as reflecting the company's position. Gretty's corporate email was blocked. Another former intern of mine had his contract terminated the very next morning after he reposted the article, "Why Strategists Are Leaving Silently." I felt cold rage, not anger, just coldness, a crystallized reaction to what had been going on for years, erasure, displacement, imitation. And then I wrote to another person, not an ally, not a friend, someone who had once been on the other side, Mark Lowell, a former COO who retired, leaving behind a system that worked until they started breaking it. I sent him one sentence. Remember the phrase, "If you change the narrative, leave traces?" An hour later, he replied, "Did you leave any traces?" And I realized that the struggle doesn't begin with conflict. It begins with memory. It wasn't an interview. It was a show of force. The journalist from Branded Equity Weekly turned on her recorder and said, "We have official confirmation from 3 independent sources that Phase 0 is based on the framework you created." I nodded. She continued, "And you have documents confirming the date of creation, correspondence, author's edits, timestamps." "I have something else," I said. And I took out an old notebook, black, worn, without a logo. I kept it when I left because my intuition told me I would need it. On the first page was a handwritten title, Brand Phase 0, Risk Scenarios. The date was 3 years ago. The handwriting was mine. The pages were covered in graffiti, comments, diagrams, and notes from meetings. "This isn't a draft, it's architecture," I said. "They just repainted the facade." 2 days later, the article was published. The headline, "How the Truth Changes When Positions Change." The subheading, "Exclusive Investigation, the story of a strategist who was tried and failed to be erased from the brand's history." It spread across LinkedIn, appeared in the 10 must-read cases of brand ethics selection, and was referenced in the Wall Street branding column as an example of a quiet rebellion with a steel backbone. And then, boom, a comment on Twitter from the company's former COO, who now heads consulting in Europe. I don't comment on corporate drama, but if you're reading this article, imagine what would have happened if we had actually listened to our architects. Brenda Whitman isn't just a voice, she's a plan. By the end of the week, I was invited to an event in London called Future Integrity in Brand Leadership. I read the name on the list of speakers. The name, not former, not anonymous, not source. Just Brenda Whitman, strategic architect. I put on a dark blue suit, not the one left over from my corporate days, a different one. No jacket, no gloss, but with a pocket for a notebook. My name appeared on the slide under the phrase First Mover Integrity. I walked onto the stage. The room was full. In the front row sat those who had crossed out my name in reports a year ago. Now they were listeners. I said, "Sometimes you get crossed out of a slide. Sometimes you get crossed out of a room. But if your work was real, it will sprout even where it was buried." After the speech, I returned to the dressing room. There was a letter waiting for me. Printed. Anonymous. Not everyone wants the truth to come out. Not everyone is ready to stand by it when it's loud. But you set an example, and now it won't be silenced. I smiled. I remembered how I had thought for years that everything had been destroyed. In reality, what is destroyed never disappears. It just waits for the moment to be reborn with a bang. At 10 in the morning, a letter arrived. Not to my personal mail, no, officially, through a lawyer. "Miss Whitman, You are being sent a notice of a request for settlement of the dispute between the parties. The company acknowledges the existence of misunderstandings regarding authorship, but insists that. And then came the formalities. Not a single word of apology. Not a single, "You were right." Just one clear message between the lines. "We're afraid you'll go further." I read it twice. Then I sent a copy to my lawyer and another to Marcus Willett, director of the Ethical Business Alliance. An hour later, he replied briefly, "Your materials are a case for our next panel. Speak up or I'll speak for you." This time, not as a victim, not even as an expert, but as a symbol of systemic failure. A Case for Silent Theft was the name of the panel. I was introduced last, and I didn't read anything from a piece of paper. I just stood there and spoke about how easy it is to erase a name, how they change the wording in Excel when you're no longer in the room, how architectural revision becomes just a new cover for old walls. The next day, the headlines in the professional media read, "Whitman versus Weiler, authorship in question, new case of corporate plagiarism, company position, silence." But silence is no longer a strategy. It is shattered by every message from within. I didn't expect a letter from Jane. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. She was the one who had signed off on the reorganization that had shown me the door. But now, "I didn't know it would go this far. I can send you the minutes of the meeting where they changed the name of your framework. Will that be enough?" I didn't respond right away, but a day later I said, "Send them, and sign if you're ready." She signed, and so did 3 others, former analysts who had kept notes, slides, and Google Meet recordings. There was no longer enough evidence. There was too much. At 4 o'clock, I signed an official statement to the Corporate Ethics Committee. Section: Intellectual Property Appropriation. Reason: falsification of authorship for commercial gain. But the real blow wasn't legal. It came through a video. Brenda Speaks, a recording of my speech at a conference. It was posted without my permission, but I didn't ask for it to be taken down. On the contrary, I shared it. The number of subscribers grew by the hour. There were hundreds of comments. Most were from women over 50 who wrote, "I was also erased." They took my work and said it was a new approach. "You gave me a voice. I will no longer be silent." This is no longer my story. It's a wave that's tearing down corporate facades. On Friday morning, I went to the company's website. In the Our Vision section, they removed all references to Phase 0. No comment. Silence. But we already know that silence is not a defense. It's a slow surrender. I took a screenshot and saved it in the same folder as my notebook, PDFs, and Jane's letter, and I named it The Moment of Transition. Because I am no longer fighting for the truth. I am dictating it. When the lawyer called, I already knew. "They signed," he said instead of a greeting. "The full agreement? With compensation, acknowledgement of authorship, and a non-compete clause. They want you to stop using the Phase 0 brand." But Phase 0 isn't a brand, it's a principle, and it doesn't belong to them. I didn't smile. I took a sip of coffee. Bitter. No sugar. That's what this victory was like. Not sweet, but mine. The press immediately picked up on it. Whitman versus Weiler. Case officially closed. Phase 0 recognized as the intellectual property of Brenda Whitman. Company agrees to settlement. No trial, but consequences. Even people who had once avoided my name called me. One of them was Mark, the former head of communications. "Brenda, I remember when you wrote that model. And I remember how you called it impractical. I was a fool." "You were then. But now you can just be honest, and that will be enough." I was invited to 3 conferences, 2 online, 1 offline in Seattle. Panel: Ownership and Voice, Women Who Took Back Their Names. I didn't prepare any slides. I just wrote on a piece of paper, "Silence is also a response, but we have the right to speak first." And when a hand went up in the room, a young woman about 23 years old, and asked, "What if you're just starting out? What if you don't have a voice yet?" I replied, "Then use someone else's, until you create your own. But choose carefully. Choose someone who won't silence you." Lane Axis Group is the name of a new organization that Marcus Willett, 2 other experts, and I are launching. Our mission is to provide consulting and copyright protection in the tech business and support women over 45. I don't want to just talk. I want others not to wait 20 years to be heard. The office is quiet, but not deafening. It's a constructed silence. On the wall is a poster of my speech. On the table is the first printed version of the Phase Zero framework, and one letter, neatly folded, the same one signed by Jane. I didn't destroy it. I kept it as a reminder that even weakness has an archive. The last call is from a journalist who has been following the case. Can we say that you have forgiven the company? I paused. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean keeping quiet. Then what does it mean to you? It's liberation, not from the company, but from the hurt and from the silence. When I got home, it was already dark. I turned on the kettle, put a cup on the stove, and didn't open my laptop. It was my evening. No strategies, no statements, no plans, just mine. Because now I know the most important thing. Silence is not always the path to peace, but sometimes your voice is the path to yourself.